Please welcome to stage Vani Mandya, Country Managing Director of Head of Human Pharma at Boehringer Ingelheim, and Navina Evans, Chief Workforce Training and Education Officer at NHS England, who are discussing transformative approaches to leadership with global thought leader Professor Amy Edmondson.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Vani Mandya. I'm the Country Managing Director and Head of Human Pharma for Boehringer Ingelheim in the UK and Ireland. It's my pleasure today to introduce to you our speaker, Professor Amy Edmondson. But before that, a few words about Boehringer Ingelheim and why we bring this topic of transformative leadership to the discussion here today. Boehringer Ingelheim is a global pharmaceutical company, the largest privately held pharmaceutical company globally. As a privately held company, we think in the long term. Our commitment to improve the lives of humans and animals and transform the lives of people for generation comes from the ability to think in the long term, invest in innovation, research, and development. We invest 25% of our net sales into R&D to bring breakthrough therapies in some of the areas of greatest unmet need, be it respiratory conditions like interstitial lung disease and pulmonary fibrosis, or cardiorenal metabolic conditions like cardiovascular disease, chronic kidney disease, and type 2 diabetes. We also believe that breakthrough therapies are necessary but not sufficient to delivering the ultimate health outcomes for patients at the individual and population health level. Collaboration across the multidisciplinary stakeholders is important in partnering with patients, with the NHS, in looking at the greatest challenges along the patient pathway and bringing those solutions to deliver impact. Lastly, these collaborations do not work in a sustainable way. Organizations, public or private, are not successful in sustaining themselves if we don't have the right leadership and culture and values. The previous panel addressed that as well. And therefore, we invest significantly in transformative leadership and what it takes to create cultures where everyone takes the empowerment, everyone feels accountable to deliver their best, to challenge the status quo and truly bring about change, which is why it's my pleasure to introduce Amy Edmondson with the amazing body of work she's done around building this environment in organizations. Amy is a professor of leadership and management at the Harvard Business School, supporting the study of human interactions that lead to the creation of successful enterprises that contribute to the betterment of society. Best known for her groundbreaking work on psychological safety in the workplace, something I subscribe to as a leader, Amy is the author of 7 books, along with more than 150 case studies and articles. She has been recognized by the biannual Thinkers 50 global ranking of management thinkers since 2011, in the last 2 editions coming at #1 in 2021 and 23. Her latest book, The Right Kind of Wrong, The Science of Failing Well, provides a framework to think, discuss, and practice failures wisely, and was released just a few months ago in September 2023. Importantly to today's conversation, her book, The Fearless Organization, offers practical guidance for leaders and individuals, leaders of teams and organizations who are serious about success in the modern economy to bring learning, innovation, and growth. With that, Amy, welcome. Really looking forward to the conversation between Navina and yourself.
So am I, very much so. But first I'm speaking and then conversing, right? So I can't speak sitting down. Is that okay? Okay, all right. Okay, so hello everybody. You might have noticed the title here, and indeed, work without fear. Why start there? It's kind of an old idea, and I want to just say right off the bat, what I am talking about is interpersonal fear, the kinds of fear that hold us back from doing our job the best way possible. Not fear of some virus that could kill us. We should be afraid of that. Not fear of other things that may be happening that truly are dangerous to us. Let's maintain that kind of fear. But fear in the workplace. Edmund Burke actually said this 300 years ago, no passion so effectively robs the mind of its powers of acting and reasoning, I'm going to double down on reasoning, as fear. Right? And so fear, we now know this, right? He just said that. We now know this, that it actually narrows, constricts our ability to think, our ability to do the very best possible work. So we need to drive fear out of the workplace. W. Edwards Deming said, when there is fear, there will be wrong figures. And Lucian Leap, the patient safety expert in the US, says, to identify system failures, we need to make it safe for all healthcare workers to report errors. And this is what I'm talking about. And I'll be very clear in just a few minutes what I'm not talking about when I talk about psychological safety. But first, let's take a step back. About 8 years ago, there was a New York Times article. This is the headline reproduced here on this slide, called "What Google Learned from Its Quest to Build the Perfect Team." Now, I have to admit to you that when I woke up and New York Times outside the door, Sunday, February 25th, 2016, when I saw this headline, my heart sank. Why did my heart sink? Well, I'm supposed to be a team expert. And what the New York Times is announcing to me at this moment is, I have just been scooped by Google. Google, with all its remarkable analytic capacity and data, has, in fact, according to the New York Times, discovered the surprising truths about why some teams thrive and others falter. Oh dear. And it's a very long article, and it's Sunday morning, and I'm pretty sure my colleagues will expect me to have read it by tomorrow. So I sat down and started to dig in. What did Google learn? What is the secret sauce to an effective team? The article is long and beautifully written, and it takes you down many dead ends. Google tried many things that did not predict team effectiveness, put many things in the model, until finally you turn the page and you get here. This is Julia Rozovsky. She led the study. She has an MBA from Yale, a school that we have a lot of competition with, but that's okay. When Julia and her colleagues discovered the concept of psychological safety in academic papers, not a bad place to look, by the way, it was as if everything suddenly fell into place. Okay, so I admit, emphasis added, this was not in the original. But for me, at least, it's not every day that the New York Times says my work, and indeed, if you clicked through the online version, you got to my original academic study on this very point, that my work made everything fall into place at Google. So I'm starting to feel pretty good. And then I contemplate the date. It's 2016. That academic article was published in 1999. So that is a 17-year gestation rate. Right? My husband, who's a bench scientist, has gone from bench to bedside in less time than that, in a decade, in fact. So maybe not such a good thing. But why do I tell you this? Because it was Google's work and the New York Times work that put this on the map. But before that, many, many academics, people like me, had used the measure as a very predictive measure of team performance, of team learning behavior, of all sorts of things that we'll get into. But it was not on the main stage. It was not something that companies and healthcare workers, except those doing research, were paying much attention to. So now we come to a point in time where a lot of people are paying attention, and some of that attention is downright faulty. I'll get to that. But here's my game plan for you. Everyone's talking, or at least a lot of people are talking about psychological safety, but what is it really? I do not want any of you to leave this room or streaming or wherever you are without a good answer to that question. Number two, how do you develop it? You know, what is it that you can do? What is it that each and every one of us can do to build it as individuals, as organizations? And then finally, is there any research evidence? Yes, there is, not just Google, that this matters. There's actually peer-reviewed studies that shows that this matters for performance, particularly in environments like yours. What do I mean by environments like yours? Well, we'll see. Uncertain, complex, interdependent. So let's start here. Everyone talks about psychological safety. What is it really? Here's my definition. It is a belief that your work environment is safe for interpersonal risk. What's an interpersonal risk? Well, it's speaking up with an idea, a question, I need help, a concern, a dissenting view, and yes, even a mistake or a failure. Not that it's easy. I don't think those things are ever easy at work, but that you believe it's expected and welcome around here. Why? Because of what's at stake. So that's what psychological safety is. You can think of it as a sense of permission for candor. Not sloppy, let me tell you everything in my head, but candor. And I'll clarify this in a moment. Why is this, why do I even need to say this? Why is this rare? Why is this not something we can take for granted? Well, let's face it. The NHS, pretty much any workplace you can think of, very few people, in fact, I'd argue almost nobody, wakes up in the morning and jumps out of bed because they can't wait to get to work to look ignorant, incompetent, intrusive, or negative. Am I right? No, we all want to look smart, capable, helpful, positive. And so, it's perfectly natural to hold back. If I don't want to look ignorant, just don't ask a question. Right? I don't want to look incompetent, don't admit a mistake, and so on and so forth. So what I want you to internalize is this. Holding back in the gray zone is second nature. It is over-determined. It is over-learned. By the time you are a working adult, you know how to navigate in a way that preserves face, right? That's fine, except that it doesn't produce high-quality, safe care, right? So, psychological safety is not, please hear this, 100 times hear this, it's not about being nice. Right? It's not a guarantee that all your ideas will prevail. It's not a license to whine and hope someone else fixes all the problems that you so wisely see. It's not freedom from conflict. It's permission to get into it, to be data-driven, to have high-quality conversations. It's not job security. Right? That's another topic. Right? And it's not permission to slack off. Right? It's not permission to do whatever you want. In fact, I would argue that all of us, but particularly people in leadership roles, have two absolutely essential jobs if we want to produce high-quality, safe care. And one is, yes, to create an environment where people believe they can speak up openly, truthfully, quickly, even when they're just not quite sure that something is right or isn't right. And the other is to inspire and enable people to achieve high standards. If you don't do either of these tasks well in your team, in your part of the organization, then yeah, we have what I call the apathy zone. This is where people quit and stay. And sure, if it was all and only about psychological safety, maybe we'd be at risk of creating the comfort zone, the proverbial comfort zone. In the research I've done in healthcare delivery, I don't see much evidence of that. I do see a great deal of evidence of what I'll call the anxiety zone, where people are well-trained, truly committed, they care, and they're afraid. Afraid to speak up, afraid to ask for help when they're in over their head. This is not an ideal workplace, especially in healthcare. And then if we get it right, we are possibly able to produce what I'll call the learning zone. But let's face it, if the work is uncertain and interdependent, the learning zone is one and the same as the high performance zone. In a sense, that's what Google showed us. The work those teams were doing was uncertain and interdependent, and the only way to do it well was that people had permission to engage, permission to speak up. So a longer quote from Lucian Leap is here. He says, we must, and he says this so well, we must, of course we must hold people responsible for high standards. By the way, it's our job to make sure they're enabled to achieve those high standards. But we also need to recognize that most breakdowns result from faulty systems, not faulty people. And in order to identify and correct systems failures, we need to make it safe for all healthcare workers to report errors. And this is most certainly not the norm when I started doing research on medication errors, maybe not even the norm today. So this is what it is, right? Permission for candor. You've seen what it isn't as well. So how do you develop it? What is it that each and every one of us can do? Now, I'm going to describe some things that I call leadership behaviors. That does not mean they are only done by leaders, far from it. That means they can be done by, should be done by all of us. But leaders have an outsized impact, let's face it. Whether those are leaders of a whole organization, leaders of a team, leaders of a medical unit, your behavior matters. So the three leadership behaviors I want to talk about that have been shown to give rise to environments of learning, environments of candor, are these: framing the work, inviting participation overtly, explicitly, and responding productively. Let's take these each one at a time. What framing the work, by the way, is really reframing the work. It's recognizing that everyone comes to work with a tacit, taken for granted mental model that is shaping what they see and what they miss. People need to have shared expectations. We have those cognitive beliefs. We need to sort of replace the possibly faulty ones with more healthy, more learning-oriented, more growth mindset-oriented frames that allow us to do great work collaboratively, especially. So this is about building shared expectations, shared meaning, about the nature of what lies ahead, right? So that we can navigate uncertainty together. Let me give you an example. I did some research more than 20 years ago now at Children's in Minnesota, which at the time was a patient safety leader. This is Julie Morath. She was a patient safety, still is, pioneer. She came in as chief operating officer of that organization, and to try to drastically improve and change how things worked to create more safety, safer care. She would go around, and I quote, over and over and over, saying healthcare by its very nature is a complex, error-prone system, echoes of Lucian Leape, and so many other great error thinkers. Why does she say this? Because she says when she came on board, how did people think about, let's say, an adverse drug event? Well, who's the culprit? Who did it? Not what happened, but who did it. If that's your mental model, you'll never get the truth, because people will naturally, and for their own health, hold back. What she's saying is no, 90% of the time when things go wrong, there was a system breakdown. So she's essentially saying, because complex systems like yours are prone to breakdown by their very nature, when you speak up, you're not a pest, you're saving lives. A total reframe on what that behavior looks like so as to build it in. Now, I did a study of cardiac surgery teams some years ago now, implementing a then new technology for minimally invasive cardiac surgery, and I found naturally occurring differences in how the surgeons who were adopting the innovation framed the journey that lay ahead, right? And now I'll just give you sort of the small, profound results of the reframing that I saw. So there's a cardiac surgery nurse. She's a true expert. She's been in this role for 20 years. I interview her to say, well, what do you think? How's it going? She says, oh, when I see one of these on the list for tomorrow, it's like, oh, do we really have to do this? Just get me a fresh blade and I'll slash my wrists right now. I think we take two things away from this quote. One, she doesn't like it, right? And two, she is indeed a trained healthcare professional because of the fresh blade. There will be no infections on the way to this miserable act. So I get the chance, 1,000 miles away, this is an academic medical center, another academic medical center, another remarkably skilled, experienced cardiac surgery nurse, and I ask her the same question. I expect the same answer. And she says, I was so grateful I was picked for the team. Every time I see one of these on the list, it's like I'm excited, I'm enlightened, I'm making a difference, right? So what's the difference? It's not, the technology is the same, the context is the same, the surgeon experience is the same, everything is the same except the framing. And we had 16, and slightly more than half of those 16 were in the execution frame. The surgeons repeatedly said things like, I'm a capable guy, and they were all men, I have made changes before, I'll make changes again, what's the big deal? The others, the slightly fewer than half, said things like, we've never done anything like this before. I'm going to be dependent on you. You will be my eyes and ears in this smaller incision where I don't have the whole operative field. Right? They said, this is going to be about what a group of people can do when they put their minds to it. Learning frame, and it made all the difference. So what can you do? Right? I would say ask yourself, routinely, what have I said today to reinforce the message that anyone's voice could make the difference between a successful outcome and one that isn't? What have I said today to reinforce the message that because of the work we do, things will go wrong? The only question is, will we hear about it? It's fast recovery and learning that matter most. Or what have I said today that reinforce the message that quality and safety are produced by us through constant learning? We are never doing the same thing twice exactly. So that's framing the work. It's saying things to let people know, to remind people of, in a sense, what they already know, let them know you know that the work ahead is complex, interdependent, and things could go wrong, right? Now, not enough. It's stage setting. The next thing you must do is invite voice explicitly. If I had only 3 minutes with you, I would just show you this slide. The most powerful leadership action, leadership with a small L, anyone can do it, all of us should, is ask good questions. What's a good question? Well, it's one that focuses on some issue at hand, maybe a patient case, invites careful thought, by the way it's worded, I'll illustrate, and gives people space to respond. So it's not a yes-no question. It's not a leading question. I'm right? No, it's a question that does these things, such as to broaden the discussion. What are we missing? Who has a different view? Right? That's my favorite question, because it's a better question than does anyone have a different view? A, that's yes, no. B, that puts the bar very high. Any one of you brave enough to slow me down? Good, no. But who has a different view says, one of you has the treasure, I just don't know which one. It's an invitation. It's a profound invitation. The other kind of good question is the kind that asks us to go deep. Walk me through your thinking. Okay, I see that you're passionate about this. Can you give me experiences you've had, evidence? What's your reasoning? Right? Very, very important. These are the secret sauce to what I'll call high-quality conversations so that we can all make better decisions in the face of uncertainty. Inviting participation often looks like requesting dissent, saying not just I'm open to dissent, but I insist on dissent. Don't worry, not all the time. I'll be clear about this, but there is a marvelous story from ancient history, not really ancient history. Alfred Sloan, who was one of the great CEOs of the mid-20th century, who led General Motors from a small regional company to a global powerhouse. In his memoir, My Years with General Motors, Sloan tells the following story. He's got his top team around the table. You can tell by the opening of this quote what kind of top team that was. Gentlemen, I take it we are all in complete agreement on the decision. They are making a decision about whether to acquire another company. Big deal decision. Important, slightly irreversible decision. You can almost see the smile on Sloan's face about that lovely agreement his team has just given him, right? Wrong. Check out the rest of the story. Sloan says, well, then I propose we postpone discussion of this matter until our next meeting. Why? To give ourselves time to develop disagreement, which he equates, quite interestingly, with deeper understanding of this matter. In other words, he's saying if you guys were any good, you would have had something to say here. Right? He insists on dissent. Now, I want to be clear. This is not for what should we have for lunch today. Right? This means when you recognize uncertainty and reasonably high stakes, then you take the time to have a high-quality conversation. Then you take the time to make sure we're not missing something. The rest can just go on as it does. So what can you do? Right? Ask yourself, how many good questions have I asked today or this week? Have I demonstrated a bias for action while ensuring that concerns can be heard to avoid preventable failures? And then finally, have I ensured dissent for uncertain, important decisions? So you've set the stage. There's uncertainty here. There's risk here. There's novelty here. You've invited the quiet voices in, and now You hear something you don't like. How do you respond? Short answer, productively. Take a breath. Let me tell you another automotive story, another automotive CEO story. Alan Mulally came in a decade ago to turn Ford around. Ford Motor Company was in big trouble. Alan came in and asked his team to use a simple system. He said, we will meet every week until we get this right, and then we'll keep meeting. Bring me your updates, red for problems, yellow for concerns, green for all is well, okay? Around the table, no longer all the white men that Sloan had, but still, guess what color all their reports were? Green, you were there. Okay, yeah, you were there. So indeed, green, like 4 weeks. So finally Mulally says on like the 4th week, he says, listen team, we're on track to lose $17 billion this year. Notice that's a reframe, right? What isn't going well? Notice that's a darn good question, right? Mark Fields takes the bait, raises his hand, describes a very serious problem with a new vehicle launch upon which the turnaround strategy depends. I won't go into details, but everyone else around the table had the following thought, according to a reporter that they spoke with. This is Mark's last day on the job. Honestly, they thought he'd be fired for speaking truth to power. That is not what happened. What happened was Mulally put his hands together and he started to applaud, and then he said, Mark, thank you for that clear line of sight. How can we help? Picture perfect. That's a productive response. Appreciative and forward-looking. Appreciative, I don't mean fake. Oh, Mark, how wonderful. It wasn't. But thank you for that clear line of sight. That's a great line. If you think about it, you can use it. And not, as I would be tempted to ask, how the heck did that happen? That's an important question. We'll look at it later. But in this moment, how can we help? Forward looking. Right? Time is tight. Let's get on with it. So Mulally puts it beautifully. He says, you have to make honest feedback a positive experience because it isn't naturally. I had to demonstrate with my behavior that I welcomed it. Now that's particularly important for senior executives, but it's literally important for all of us. We have to demonstrate with our behavior that we welcome it. If someone tells you something you don't like, gives you constructive feedback, your job is to say, thanks for giving me your thoughts. I'd like to learn more. You know, that's it. It's not that you have to agree, but you sure have to learn more. So in my Back to the Cardiac Surgery study, there was a moment, a beautiful moment of responding productively, where one of the nurses during a procedure dropped a vein graft on the floor. She immediately spoke up, and the surgeon, bless his heart, didn't say a word. He just made another incision, right? So it wasn't exactly, well, gee, great. But you know what could have happened. All of you know what could have happened. The anesthesiologist told me maybe a millisecond was lost. No yelling, no screaming. He didn't need to. She knew she'd made a mistake, right? That's, I'll call this one a humane response, right? Humane and forward-looking. Let's get on with it. So how does it feel when someone points out your error? Well, come on, let's be honest. Right? Most of us don't like it very much. Here's the question. Is it possible to learn a new response? Well, Dr. Jonathan Cohen at Moffitt Cancer Center in the US says yes. He says that as an anesthesiologist, he trained his brain to equate someone pointing out his error with patients getting safer care. And then he was okay with it, right? Then he learned to like it. It also, he points out, and he's right, means that he's doing something right as a leader, right? So he should take credit for that. He should feel good about that. I got this, he tweeted this slide, and then I interviewed him for my most recent book, and he's honest. He says, actually, let me be honest, it didn't always feel this way. I had to relearn a response, right? Okay, so what can you do? All right, ask yourself, how do I usually respond to bad news? What's my face doing? How does it feel when someone points out my error? What will I do to respond appreciatively and constructively to whatever happens to foster speed and quality, right? And then finally, how will I practice and hold myself and my colleagues accountable for a productive response? So this really boils down to right? You don't have to remember all of this. Just remember to have the kind of humility where you recognize, I have a valid point of view, but I don't have a crystal ball, right? I can't see the future. And so I will naturally call attention to novelty, uncertainty, complexity, the need for us to work together to get this right. Reinvigorate your curiosity. That will, you don't have to memorize those questions. You will naturally ask them if you're genuinely curious. And then finally, have enough empathy to be constantly thinking, how would I want someone to respond to me if I was in their shoes? You will mount a productive response, I assure you. Okay, so just very quickly to finish up here, I want to give you just a little bit of the evidence. I'll give you 2 studies quickly. Why psychological safety matters so much for performance. They're both writ large in the healthcare context. One's pharma, one isn't. One's healthcare delivery. But bottom line here, please take this to heart. Psychological safety isn't the goal, right? It's a means to the goal. The goal in your world is safe, high-quality care. So I had the privilege of studying 23 NICUs in North America, in the US and Canada, with an amazing doctoral student at the time, Ingrid Nemhard. And all of them were actively engaged in quality improvement projects. We measured the psychological safety across clinicians, physician, nurse, respiratory therapist. And guess what we found right off the bat with the validated measure? We found that there were statistically significant differences in your confidence that your voice matters at work based on your role. Does that surprise you? No. I'm sorry, it didn't surprise us either. But here's what did, and I think this is just really important for you to understand. When we looked closely, as one does, at the data, one by one across these 23 NICUs, what we found was, in some of them, again, slightly fewer than half, it did not matter what role you had. The psychological safety levels were absolutely the same, flat and high. Which means that in the other, more than half units, it was steeper than what you see here. Okay, so 2 questions come to mind. Question 1, does it matter? The answer to question 1 is a resounding yes. Ingrid stayed with it, and for 3 years studying the quality improvement work, those with the flat, high psychological safety had an 18% improvement compared to their counterparts, 18% more improvement than their counterparts in morbidity and mortality. Question 2, what explains the difference? That's what I was just talking about. It turned out those medical directors in those units naturally framed the work as the kind of work where we need to hear from you. They naturally asked good questions, and they were humble about their lack of a crystal ball. So, last one, innovation, pharma sector. Henrik Bressman at INSEAD and I studied 62 pharmaceutical teams, all responsible for innovation. This one's quick. We were curious, do teams with more diverse expertise have more innovation success or more homogeneous? What do you think is going to be the case? Option A, hands for option A? Yep, pretty popular. Hands for option B? Very unpopular, but a couple of people are ahead of me here because guess what? Option B is right. No, don't take that to heart. It's actually not true. But it's partly right. Here's my regression line through the 62 data points, and indeed, there is a slight but statistically significant advantage of being more homogeneous. Say what? No. Some of you were thinking already, don't show me a regression line. Show me a scatter plot. So I will. And indeed, the plot thickens. Well, the plot clarifies here. What we see is, as most of you expected, only the diverse teams hit it out of the park, but some of them crashed and burned. What, if anything, might help us explain why the dots at the top versus the dots at the bottom? How about we mark them in a different color, a gray color, if they have one standard deviation higher psychological safety than the mean? Indeed, we do that, and now we see the relationship we expected. So, what do we take away from here? Teams with diverse talents have greater potential, but they face greater challenges. I will end with a study, not done by me, a meta-analysis, meaning Stuart Benderson at WashU and his student Brent Sanner brought together at the time all of this team studies that use the variable psychological safety. They brought them all together to see what do we know collectively from more than 100 studies at that time. Now there's more than 1,000. And what they found was consistently across studies, we saw that relationship between psychological safety and performance at the team level. But here's the, you don't have to read that, but here's the elegant result. Just, I couldn't have planned it better myself. We find that psychological safety is more strongly associated with learning and performance in studies conducted in what they call knowledge-intensive settings, right? That is, settings that involve complexity, creativity, and sense-making. That's your setting, right? So the more your setting has those attributes, the more psychological safety matters to performance. So let me end there
we are out of time.
We are out of time.
But recognizing that Navina has a couple of questions,
oh, yeah.
I hope it's okay that we take a couple of quick questions from you.
Yes, yes, indeed.
It's been phenomenal conversation, really enjoyed and really contextual.
Thank you so much, Amy. And I just want to say, I have been a follower for a very long time. And I want to thank you because through my leadership journey and my professional life, I kept coming back to your work over the years, especially when I felt a bit wobbly. So I would recommend that to everybody in the room. And also, thank you for answering the 3 questions which we put to you to help us shape this session. I just want to ask one thing about that you made the link between fear, team effectiveness, and candor.
Yes.
And you talked, and it really resonated for me because every one of us in this room working in health and care are serving people who put enormous trust in us.
Yeah.
So therefore, psychological safety, why wouldn't it be top of the agenda? I want to ask you a particular question about the relationship with power. So there will be people in this room who have a lot of power, people like me. There will be people who feel they are powerless. How can we really realize psychological safety when we come from those positions and understanding of power?
Let me start by saying that, power and hierarchy, let's call them a risk factor, right? But they're not deterministic. And I think that's in part what that NICU study shows, because they all have the same power differential a priori. The real question is, how is power handled by those who have it? Right? So I would want to work for you, just saying, right? Because when people in positions of power recognize that they don't have a crystal ball, recognize that they are at risk of missing something, they show up in a profoundly different way than otherwise. But those who do not have power need to realize they are absolutely powerful in their own way, because how they show up matters too. How you show up in any role, very frontline caregiver, medical director, whatever role you're in, how you show up has a far more profound impact on others' lives at work than you think. Yeah. And if you show up as humble, curious, empathic, you will make a difference. You will create, really what this is all about is, can we create an environment of continuous learning? Can we stop choosing knowing over learning? We naturally, spontaneously choose knowing over learning, and we need to, at whatever level, whatever role, we need to aggressively choose learning over knowing.
Thank you. I think one last thing, if I may. I could ask a million questions. So that's really interesting that we have the agency for many of us who feel we might be stuck in that anxiety zone. Would that be fair?
Yes.
So one tip for getting out of the anxiety zone?
Well, the most important tip is get curious. Right? So start asking questions. You will be appreciated. I don't mean, going around sort of accusatory questions. I mean just, I'm not sure I see this right. I'd like to know how you see it, right? If you become the person who asks questions, you will be the person who is helping the team learn. So don't stay stuck. Realize that if you're in the anxiety zone, you're not alone. It's actually kind of the norm. If I get data from 1,000 systems, the majority will be living there. But you can escape simply by doing these 3 things: calling attention to uncertainty, asking good questions, and monitoring your own response.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Excellent. Amy, it has been such a pleasure. I hope all of you enjoyed this conversation with Amy. I'm also a big fan and apply these principles in my day-to-day leadership, not always effectively because I continue to grow and
Oh,
develop.
I would challenge
In the complex world that we live in, we see the challenges patients face, the NHS faces. I think these are great sources of inspiration on how we can collectively partner to improve, ultimately, patient care and population health outcomes. So thank you very much, Amy, and this is a dialogue for us to continue.
Thank you. Thank you.